No, the views and opinions expressed during RealBlackTalk.com do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CCTV, the Cambridge, the community, the television, anybody else. The views and opinions expressed are of those who are talking. So if I'm talking, then they're my views and opinions. Hold me responsible.
Just joining us, this is MaximizingProgress.tv, formerly known as High Tech.
Good evening and welcome to another program with Peaceworker Radio on WCCR, Voice and Vision of Cambridge. It looks like I've got somebody behind me, but that's not. That's just, there you go. Thanks for joining us here at Cambridge Community Television, WCCR. There are some things that need to be said, and I think the appropriate time to say them is now. You can't see it from where you are, from the vantage point. It is possible to see it from this vantage point. So if you look here on your screen, right here, I'll get the arrow over there. Doesn't look like the arrow is going to be possible to get over there, but on the far left-hand side of your screen where you can see passengers, pedestrians walking back and forth, you can see a yellow tape. This yellow tape is attached to the front window. The window was broken in two places last night. It was broken through in that space and shattered in the space above it to the left. So we're in a TV studio here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, directly on a main thoroughfare, which you can see the shadows of cars moving just beyond the sidewalk. This is a main thoroughfare called Massachusetts Avenue, the main thoroughfare that runs through Cambridge and then over the Charles River into Boston. It runs through Boston and then connects to I-95. It's a main thoroughfare. And I-95, of course, connects us to Florida. So the window was shattered last night, and that's what I'm going to be speaking about now. The window was shattered last night, perhaps out of a racist or anti-democratic or homophobic or just downright nasty reasons. We don't really know, but we do know that we are a public service radio and television station. We do produce programs which are controversial. There are members of not only of the staff but the public who use the facilities here at Cambridge Community Television to produce shows with political content. Now, some of the shows are controversial, and that's basically what we do here at Cambridge Community Television. The public media, if it's Fox News or if it's CNBC or CNN or private stations, do not really produce, it's been my experience, do not really produce content that is of a very controversial nature. We don't really know the reason for this, but we do know that the interest level of the individuals who pay for the content through selling of commercials then want to have an influence on the content that is produced. And for that reason, the content is not always either very controversial, like off the charts controversial. For instance, the fact that in reference to Bernie Sanders, I've heard commentators say You can't vote for Bernie Sanders, for God's sake. He's a socialist. So it wouldn't occur to this private channel to even allow a balanced report on socialism. And for this reason, it is necessary to have public service radio and television stations who are interested and whose producers are interested in telling a story about politics, about the racist nation that we live in, about its imperialist aims, about the reality that the United States is engaging again in a extremely one-sided, controversial program of re-entering Iraq, this time to go after ISIS. There could be a limitless number of reasons to repeat the same mistakes again. The definition for insanity, by the way, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting in the same way and expecting different results. There are no different results. And here's the same reason for my expressing this on television. If a nation, any nation, invaded the United States on its shores, Florida along the East Coast, California and Washington on the West Coast, you can be damn certain that there would be every man, woman, and child in this nation unified to get rid of whoever was trying to invade and conquer this nation. You can be certain of it. And when the family members were killed by the invading army, you can be damn certain, without a question of a doubt, that every member of that family would have a vendetta out against whoever it was that killed their relatives. You could be certain of it. And the Christian fundamentalist preachers saying that we should forgive because God is going to forgive us. You can be certain that that fundamentalist preacher would not have a prayer's chance to get his flock to join him in those kind of prayers as long as there was a war being waged on American soil. There is no war being waged on American soil. There is no invading army on American soil. There is, however, on American soil, an incredibly racist, violent, destructive fringe. It's not known. It's not being investigated by the police often, because it's often the case that individuals with an authoritarian method of looking at things have precisely the same ideas. They want unity. They don't want divergence. They don't want diversity. They want unity. But to create unity, there has to be a common goal. The common goal for unity is an invading army occupies the East or West Coast. Then you have unity in the United States. Or you have a fascist government that takes over, which is a step that we're pretty close to now. A fascist government that takes over and kills everyone who has any other ideas, who are of another race or another political ideology or speak another language or have another cultural identity, etc., etc., etc. Fascists, like the individuals that took over Germany, democratically, by the way. Many people think that Adolf Hitler had to kill his way into the leadership position in Germany. That's not the case. It was a fair political election. It was a fair election. The leadership of Germany in 1933 gave Hitler the complete power necessary to form the fascist government that he formed. Of course, then after he did it democratically, he then eliminated like fascists do, then eliminated the government by telling them they didn't have to come back, that he was going to take control, and which he did. So, to make a very long story short, the windows here at our station for those of you who just joined us, on the right-hand side where the pedestrians are walking, was broken last night in 2 different places. Our theory, my theory, is that the reason why the glass was broken is because we produce content that may be controversial. Our producers are of various ethnic and racial backgrounds. And we are living in a city against whom a neo-fascist group has decided that they are going to target, then actively target, one of the city councilors who happens to be of an ethnicity that they don't think should occupy public office. That is a question that we have addressed here. And we are proud at Peace Worker Radio to say that the city councilor who was elected 14 days ago into office with the highest majority of any of the city councilors in his second term, obviously a very capable individual, but obviously one who has attracted the attention of neo-fascists. Now, they may not call themselves neo-fascists, but I would call them neo-fascists because they seem to be targeting someone with an ethnicity that they don't condone. And they're targeting them with large amounts of money and a hate campaign. Perhaps those were the individuals that initiated or encouraged through their campaign that public radio stations, public television stations, like the one here in Central Square, were targeted. That's the message for today. So our program today is going to be about Bernie Sanders. Of course, it's going to be about Bernie Sanders. One wouldn't expect anything else to be a subject matter. And there's a reason for this. Bernie Sanders gave a very important speech in reference to his idea of democratic socialism. He explained to some extent what democratic socialism is and his intention of working with this idea. There are some things that Bernie Sanders didn't explain that perhaps he will address later in the campaign. But what is important is what Bernie Sanders did explain. And that's what we want to look at part of our program today. So without further ado, let's see what Bernie Sanders had to say.
Bernie Sanders delivered his long-awaited, much-lauded democratic socialism defense speech just yesterday, and we've got some highlights right here.
Tens of millions of American families continue today to lack the basic necessities of life. The great middle class of our country has been in decline, and faith in our political system is now extremely low. Ordinary people, working people, young people, don't vote. We have an economic and political crisis in this country And the same old politics and economics will not effectively address those crises. If we are serious about reinvigorating American democracy, we need to develop a political movement which, once again, is prepared to take on and defeat a ruling class whose greed is destroying our nation. Democratic socialism means that in a democratic, civilized society, the wealthiest people and the largest corporations must pay their fair share of taxes. I don't believe government should take over, the grocery store down the street or own the means of production. But I do believe that the middle class and the working families of this country who produce the wealth of this country deserve a decent standard of living, and that their incomes should go up, not down.
I love that he gave this speech, but it's incredible how he's been painted as a radical.
Yeah.
And so many people who would really benefit from his policy ideas are against him because they've bought into the Bernie Sanders fear-mongering. They hear the word socialist without really understanding what it means, and it scares them. And you listen to that speech and you understand exactly what he's going for. He's just trying to make sure that our wages don't continue to be stagnant. He's trying to make sure that corporations who in some years literally pay nothing in federal taxes and get a tax return, companies like Verizon and Bank of America, pay their fair share of taxes. Why is it that the middle class and the working class pays a higher percentage of their taxable income to the federal government, and then you have these massive multinational corporations not paying anything in taxes? Yes, we have the highest corporate tax rate of any developed country, but when you consider the deductions and the loopholes, we have the lowest.
Yeah.
So we have the effective tax rate that we have in the United States. And you say, well, why is that? It's because we have a free market. That's what they keep telling people. Free market. And when they hear somebody like Bernie Sanders is a socialist, it's like, oh, he wants to rig the market. He wants to take money away from rich people and just give it to poor people. And that's not right. That can't be good. But that's not what we're talking about. A free market means that the rich people rig the market in their favor, which is why when we're in the middle of economic boom times, which we are right now, corporations are making record profits. Wall Street is at record highs. Yet, we still have half the people in America, wage earners, earning less than $30,000. Why do we have the biggest income disparity since the Gilded Age? It's because that free market isn't free. That free market is rigged. It's rigged by rich people like Donald Trump and the guys and General Electric and Comcast and ExxonMobil. They rig that system so that you don't get the benefit of your labor. So even though you're working harder, producing more, you don't get to benefit. You don't get to, you don't get any of that money. So when your corporation's profits go up, that goes right in their pocket, or they ship it offshore somewhere. It doesn't go to their workers like it used to be when we had strong unions in America. And let's remember, strong unions don't only help their own people who are in that union, but it affects other people who aren't. So you're like the base setter. So now we've gotten rid of unions, right? And look what's happened to the working class in America. So what he's saying is, let's rig that free market more towards the workers so that we can have a thriving middle class in America and people can get out of poverty. Right now, you can't get out of poverty. And here's one more thing that was said at the Republican debate at Fox Business News that I haven't heard it mentioned anywhere else except this show and the Jimmy Dore show, is that when they were asked the first question about the minimum wage, Donald Trump and Ben Carson, the two leading candidates, said that wages of American workers are too high. And their plan to help rejuvenate our economy, which it doesn't need rejuvenating, it's already rejuvenated. Their plan to rejuvenate our economy is to lower the wages of workers in America. Donald Trump said wages are too high, taxes are too high, meaning people in America earn too much money. Ben Carson said if we lower the wages for inner city black teenagers, they'll get more jobs. So they're both advocating lowering wages for American workers, which is the first time I've ever heard a politician say that. And it completely slipped past everybody at Fox Business, everybody in the media.
Think about it this way.
We've even forgotten about it. I forgot about it.
Why do companies create more jobs? Think about that for a second.
The goodness of their heart, right?
Goodness of their heart. Charity.
Why would they do that?
They create more jobs when people purchase their services, right?
Yeah.
So if there is this robust middle class, working class that has disposable income, what are they going to do with that disposable income? Are they going to do what millionaires and billionaires in the United States are doing, where they just kind of hoard it and they put it in either an overseas account or in a U.S. account and just kind of sit on it? Or are they going to go out there and spend the money? They're going to go out there and spend the money. They're going to buy cars. They're going to, fortunately, hopefully one day, for people like me, buy a house, right?
Yeah.
They're going to actually go into the economy and they're going to spend that money. They're going to go out to eat. They're going to go out to malls and buy gifts during Christmas time. Whatever it is, they spend that money, and that's what stimulates the economy. And when people are buying shit, companies are kind of forced to hire more people so they can deal with the demand, okay? But if we're dealing with a situation where people don't have disposable income, they're not going to go out there and spend anything. They're barely able to afford enough to put food on the table for their families. That's what's happening right now.
You're radical.
So you're saying if we give the people who work at Walmart, for instance, more money, they're not just going to put it in a tax shelter somewhere offshore?
They might.
Yeah.
That's what I think they're going to do.
They're going to put it in a tax shelter, and it's called Walmart. They're going to spend it at Walmart. I like, there's a lot of ways that we could like sort of think of how can you commit political suicide. You would think saying, you listening to me right now, you make too much money. Bernie Sanders had to deliver a speech for why he's not an economic radical. While on the other side, as you point out, nobody's questioning the fact that he said, my supporters make too much money. How is Bernie Sanders a radical?
Because we have broken journalism.
We have broken journalism. People don't remember history. I'm going to get to that in just a second. So people are scared of socialism because they've been told by extremely rich people that if the rich have to pay a little bit more in taxes and it goes to poor people, that's robbery. You're being robbed. But the whole time, literally as they're watching that speech, they're being robbed. When productivity goes up every year for decades and you don't get that money, the money exists. Somebody's getting it. It's not you. You're being robbed. Yep. Okay, the person controlling that company, they're bored. The shareholders, maybe the shareholders, generally not even them. But the owners, they get that money. You're being robbed to pay them, man. That's why you can't afford a house, okay? That's why you make less money than your parents did. That money exists. We're making more shit than we've ever made before. Yep. We've a ton of great services and products all over America. And that's generating a lot of money. It's just not going to people like you. You're being robbed, not by socialists, but by the established economic system that we've got in America right now.
Damn, you got me fired.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, go right ahead.
Just really fast, because one of the biggest problems in America on almost every issue is that we have no understanding of history. And so when we hear socialism, we think scary, even though Bernie Sanders' economic policy would be weak sauce for the Democratic Party in the 1970s. But for some reason, it's radical now. So he had to remind in his speech, almost everything Roosevelt proposed was called socialism. When Social Security was called socialist, the minimum wage socialist, unemployment insurance, abolishing child labor, the 40-hour work week, collective bargaining, strong banking regulations, deposit insurance, job programs, all of those were called socialist. That's 100% true. And they were attacked as being a communist plot that was going to destroy America. And now what are they called? Just that's what we have. We have weekends. We don't have 4-year-olds working in coal mines. And it's the most reasonable thing in the world. Socialism is just a reasonable policy that's going to take 50 years for everybody to accept it. And for some reason, the fact that we got public free elementary schools and high schools, no, college, that would be crazy, okay? We have a 2-day weekend, a 3-day weekend. No, that's crazy. We could never have that. A $7 minimum wage, okay, a little bit higher, maybe to keep up with inflation, the cost of living. No, that'd be crazy. What the fuck is wrong with us as a country?
Well, you have to give...
Our media, go ahead.
Yeah, the media, definitely. But also, you have to hand it to the right wing, because they have successfully taken policies that obviously hurt the middle class and the working class, and somehow twisted the message to make people who are harmed by this accept these policies and vote for them. Yeah. They vote for them. I mean, I see people on my Facebook account. I know this is anecdotal evidence, but I know a lot of people probably deal with this. I see people on my friends list on Facebook constantly writing status updates about, you know, how crazy Bernie Sanders is and how we have to be careful about socialism. And these are people who are making like $7.25 an hour. Yeah. Okay? Listen, homeboy, like you're going to be harmed by these policies that you're endorsing on the Republican side. It's a terrible idea. Please, for the love of God, look into the way the economy works and how important it is to make sure you have a robust middle class.
I saw a guy, Facebook. Yeah, A comedian, right? First of all, I love it when there was right-wing comedians without health care. That's why I used to love that before Obamacare. It's like, yeah, I'm right. You get doing so, but now this guy's coming out against college, and it's all about these moochers, right? Why don't you? Yeah, hey, quit shitting out kids, and if you want your kid to go to college, work and pay for it. And so that's the old thing of like, where are we going to get the money from? We got the money. We're the richest country in the world. We're the richest country the face of the earth have ever seen, with an economy twice the size of China. We can afford to pay for college for everybody. So what I went back on his Facebook page and said, yes, let's not pay for.
So just to make an effort on my part to say something about the Young Turks commentary. Of course, many of you watching this program recognize the Young Turks. It's on YouTube. They have a show, a political commentary. They're a little bit left of CNN, but they have some very, very excellent analytical techniques that they use, particularly in looking at what media presents. That's one of the positions that they've presented here. But I wanted to get back to the idea that was just expressed by two different members of the three-member team. The idea that individuals voting for the Republican Party don't really understand what they're doing. It's true. It's completely true. If you're not a millionaire, you have no business giving your vote for the Republican Party. It's quite true. And Bernie Sanders has addressed this a number of times in his speeches very clearly. Bernie Sanders says, when he went to Liberty University, for instance, look, we may not agree on social issues. He was speaking to the 25,000 people gathered at Liberty University, a right-wing fundamentalist, Jerry Falwell University fundamentalists. He addressed them and said, look, you may not agree with everything I say, but you will agree with perhaps 70% of what I say. So why don't we just agree to agree, and what we can't agree on, just let that be. Because the points of agreement, 70%, are larger than the points of disagreement, 30%. So where do you find policies, for instance, the policies in Washington, the approval rating is down to about 20%. So if one agrees with the policies of Bernie Sanders to 70%, that's, do the math, 3.5 times better than the policies of the government now. And that's basically the question. It's true that the American public does not understand politics, has no political memory, has no historical memory. It's a reality. It wasn't always that way. There was a time, not long ago, 1960s, 70s, when there was an idea of history and an idea of politics and an idea of what political action actually means. That's been lost to the large extent. It's one of the things that has changed that was the assassination in rapid order in the 1960s and 70s of Martin Luther King. At first, in 1963 with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and then Martin Luther King, and then his brother Bobby Kennedy in 1968 when he was running for president. So Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were killed within 2 months of one another. King in beginning of April and Bobby Kennedy in the beginning of June of the same year, 1968. So it's true that the political violence in the United States is not unknown. Assassinations, 4 presidents have been assassinated out of 43. That's 10%. That's a pretty high assassination rate. I can mention that. So there's a lot of political reactionary movements and a tremendous amount of political violence in the United States. So when the idea of the Young Turks comes up, as was just the case, when a person says, perhaps not quite respectfully, although it was not derogatory, that when she said homeboy, meaning, as I understood that, everyone who votes for the Republican Party who's not a millionaire, it's just not, it makes no sense giving your vote to the Republican Party because they are a party of the millionaires and billionaires, and that's true simply by the statement that they made at the debate saying that the Ben Carson, the black candidate, can you imagine that, saying that the wages of young blacks should be reduced so that more blacks can get a job. That's ridiculous. That's economically ridiculous, but one would expect it from someone like Ben Carson, who continually makes it known that he is missing in just basic knowledge of history. I mean, not even deep knowledge. He believes that the pyramids were used as a grain storage by Joseph in the Bible to store grain. That is not the case, and that's the construction of the pyramids is such that they can't really be used. Just because they're tall does not mean that they can be used as a grain silo. They weren't constructed that way. They were constructed to be tombs, and for exclusively that purpose. So there are a lot of things to be said, many of them not really helpful, perhaps, but what's most important, and I thank you for listening to this commentary, we don't have a political memory. We have no idea of history, but the middle class is shrinking quickly. We cannot pay for the repair of our infrastructure. Global climate change is a disaster that is already happening and that is the most important single contributing factor to a real horror that we are a part of. Nuclear proliferation is another one. So there are a lot of problems out there, and Bernie Sanders, I believe, is one of the few candidates, is the only candidate presently speaking to these issues. So I thank you. And let me see if I can find another program, another commentary from Bernie Sanders that we can watch. Perhaps one in which he comes to word rather than I believe I found it. I believe I found the program. It's Bernie Sanders speaking at Georgetown University. I believe a speech that took place about 2 days ago. So let me see if I can get this up online. Take just a minute. We're having a bit of problems here at the station, and I wanted to mention. Some of the problems we're having here is in reference to the delivery of the pictures and the audio at different times. So there is a small disturbance in reference to the delivery. So let me see if I can ask for your forbearance in reference to this program. We're working here at the studio to get that problem solved. And thanks ever so much for joining us here. And now for the speech, the long-awaited speech about democratic socialism by Bernie Sanders, the one criticized so clearly and correctly by the Young Turks.
We are so excited to have with us today Senator Sanders, or Bernie, as he is known to the people of Vermont and others who are feeling the burn. This is the point where I should ask you to turn your phone off, but I won't. As long as you keep it silent, we want you to continue the conversation by tweeting @GUPolitics using the hashtag #BernieGU. Now, without further ado, please help me welcome Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you all for being out on this beautiful day. And let me thank Mo and Shweta for that wonderful introduction. I think my message to you all today is a pretty simple one. And that is our country faces some enormous problems. And these problems are not going to be solved if people turn away from political struggle, if people throw up their hands in despair and say, I don't want to get involved, it's all crap. You are getting a great education here in Georgetown. And I hope very much you will use what you have learned here to fight to create a better world and to follow in the traditions of so many people for so many years who have struggled to create a more democratic and just society. Let me take you now back to the 1937. And in his inaugural address, in the midst of the Great Depression, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt looked out at the nation in the midst of this terrible depression. And this is what he saw, and this is what he talked about in his inaugural. He saw tens of millions of people denied the basic necessities of life. He saw millions of families trying to live on incomes so meager that the pall of family disaster hung over them every single day. He saw millions of his fellow Americans denied education, recreation, and the opportunity to better their lot and the lot of their children. He saw millions lacking the means to buy the products they needed, and by their poverty, by their lack of disposable income, denying employment to many other millions. Because when you don't have money to spend, you're not creating jobs for other people. He saw 1/3 of a nation ill-housed, ill-clad, and ill-nourished. And he acted. against the ferocious opposition of the ruling class of his day, people he called the economic royalists, Roosevelt implemented a series of programs that put millions of Americans back to work, took them out of dire poverty, and restored their faith in government. He redefined the relationship of the federal government to the people of our nation. He combated cynicism, fear, and despair. He reinvigorated democracy. He transformed our country. And that is exactly what we have to do today. And by the way, almost everything he proposed, almost every program, every idea he introduced was called socialist. I thought I would mention that just in passing. Social Security, which all of you know transformed life for senior citizens in this country, was defined by his opponents as socialist. The concept of the minimum wage, that workers had to be paid at least a certain amount of money for their labor, was seen as a radical intrusion into the marketplace and was described as socialist. Unemployment insurance, when you lose your job, you have something to fall back upon. Abolishing child labor, ending the fact that children of 8, 10, 12 years of age were working in factories or working in the fields. The 40-hour work week, collective bargaining, the rights of workers to engage in negotiations with a union, strong banking regulations, deposit insurance, and job programs that put millions of people to work were all described in one way or another as socialist. Yet, as you all know, all of these programs and many more have become the fabric of our nation and, in fact, the foundation of our middle class. 30 years later, after Roosevelt's speech in the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson fought for Medicare and Medicaid to provide health care to millions of senior citizens and families with children, persons with disabilities, and some of the most vulnerable people in this country. Today, Medicare does not seem to be such a terribly radical idea to say that when somebody gets old, they should have medical insurance. But when it was proposed, once again, we heard right-wing forces describe these programs as socialistic and a threat to the American way of life. That was then, now is now. Today, in the year 2015, despite the Wall Street crash of 2008, which drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, the American people are clearly better off economically than they were in 1937. But here is a very hard truth that we must acknowledge, we must address, we must not sweep under the rug. And that is, despite a huge increase in technology, and I can remember back, I was mayor of the city of Burlington, Vermont. Anybody here from Vermont? Okay. And when I was mayor in the 1980s, a radical development took place we got computers in City Hall. Okay? 1980s. Despite a huge increase in technology and worker productivity, meaning that almost every worker in America with that technology is producing a lot more than workers that came before. Despite major growth in our GDP and a huge increase in the global economy, tens of millions of American families continue today to lack the basic necessities of life, while millions more struggle every day to provide a minimal standard of living for their families. And I hope none of you will turn your back on that reality. And the truth is, and again, this is a truth we must put on the table. Yes, we are better off today economically than we were 7 years ago when Bush left office. But the other truth is that for the last 40 years under Republican leadership and Democratic leadership, the great middle class of our country has been in decline, and faith in our political system is now extremely low. New technology, increased worker productivity, people working longer hours for lower wages, faith in our political system now extremely low. The very rich get richer, almost everyone else gets poorer. Super PACs funded by billionaires buy elections. Koch brothers alone and a few of their friends will spend more money in this election cycle than either the Democratic or Republican parties. Ordinary people, working people, young people, don't vote. We have an economic and political crisis in this country, and the same old politics and economics will not effectively address those crises. If we are serious about transforming our country, and I hope all of you are serious about transforming our country, if we are serious about rebuilding the American middle class, if we are serious about reinvigorating American democracy, we need to develop a political movement which once again is prepared to take on and defeat a ruling class whose greed is destroying our nation. Now, I know that terms like ruling class probably not talked about too often here at Georgetown. Not too often talked about on CBS or NBC. But that is the simple fact. And in my view, the billionaire class must be told loudly and clearly that they cannot have it all, that our government belongs to all of us, not just a handful of billionaires. But this goes beyond politics. We need to create a culture, an entire culture, which, as Pope Francis has reminded us, cannot just be based on the worship of money. We must not accept a nation in which billionaires compete as to the size of their super yachts, while children in America go hungry, and veterans, men and women who have put their lives on the line to defend us, sleep out on the streets.
So that's Bernie Sanders, and we're very happy to hear the comparison with Roosevelt and his policies and the mention of the term socialism. And the reason why that's important is that every political change is struggled against, is fought against tooth and nail by those that have something to lose. And in this particular case, it wasn't the case in the Roosevelt administration, although there was not that disparity in income that there is today. There were no super PACs. There were no Koch brothers. There were the Royalists, as they were called, the ruling elites, but they didn't have the complete control of the society. Still, they fought against every single policy that Roosevelt brought forward. And there was a conflict. There were serious conflicts in reference to that, and in reference to Roosevelt's policies. But let's not forget how it was that that Great Depression came about. It came about through speculation on Wall Street. It came about through the Wall Street crash. The speculators on Wall Street were dealing in similar kinds of materials, similar kinds of stocks, which weren't worth the paper they were written on. And there was a fever, there was a bubble, one would call it a gigantic bubble, which was created by this immense speculation on Wall Street. And the people lost confidence. Other traders lost confidence. Canadian traders, European traders, just simple men and women who had invested their money lost confidence and sold their stocks, and then went to the bank to pick up their cash after they had cashed in, and found that the banks would not give them their money. And this created a run. Everyone that heard that the banks will not give you your money back because they say they don't have it, create a run on the bank. And not only was there a lack of confidence in Wall Street, then there was a lack of confidence in the banking system, similar to what happened in 2008 under George Bush in a Republican president. Let's don't forget that George Bush was a Republican president. That often gets forgotten because we don't really remember 7 years ago what happened. George Bush was a Republican, and it was a Democratic president that eliminated the Glass-Steagall Act, which prevented the unity of banks as being banks and investment firms as well. So this elimination was done under the Clinton administration, but the Bush administration then, just in the next term, then allowed this incredible coming apart of the entire financial system and the crash. Within his 8 years of tenure, the entire stability of the economic system was brought down upon the heads of 300 million Americans. Who made that money were the Wall Street speculators, Harvard University and MIT University students, for instance, who were very talented in thinking out algorithms, which can then, very complicated mathematical structures, which can be used then to fleece an economic system. That is perhaps one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders says the job of Wall Street is criminal, that it's a criminal enterprise, and the job of the speculators on Wall Street, the hedge funds, is to defraud the American public. let's get back to this very interesting program by Sanders. Again, we would like to apologize for the quality of the broadcast. It's got to do with disturbances that we have here in our studio. Thank you.
Today in America, we are the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. But few Americans know that, because so much of the new income and wealth is going to the people on top. In fact, over the last 30 years, there has been a massive redistribution of wealth. Problem is, it has gone in the wrong direction. In the last 30 years, we have seen trillions of dollars flow from the hands of working families and the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. A handful of people, top 1/10 of 1%, who have seen a doubling of the percentage of the wealth that they own during that period. Doubling of the percentage of wealth they own. Unbelievably and grotesquely, the top 1/10 of 1% today owns nearly as much wealth as the bottom 90%. 1/10 of 1% owns nearly as much wealth as the bottom 90%. That is not the kind of America that we should accept. I can tell you that in my state of Vermont and all over this country, it is absolutely not uncommon to see people working 2 jobs or 3 jobs to cobble together the income and the health care they and their families need. In fact, Americans work longer hours than do the people of any other industrialized country. But despite the fact that our people are working so hard, I go around the country and I see a lot of working people, and you can see the stress and exhaustion on their faces. They're working crazy hours. Husbands hardly see wives. People don't have the quality time for their kids because they're working so hard just to bring in the income to survive. And despite all of that, despite our people working so hard, 58% of all new income generated today is going to the top 1%. Today in America, as the middle class continues to disappear, median family income is $4,100 less than it was in 1999. The median male worker made over $700 less than he did 42 years ago in inflation adjusted for dollars. Do you know why people are angry? They are angry because they are working terribly hard. And yet in real inflation adjusted for dollars, they are earning less. And they're looking all over and they say, what's happening? Why is that? But it's not just men. Last year, the median female worker earned more than $1,000 less than she did in 2007. And 58% of all new income goes to the top 1%. Today in America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, that's what we are today, more than half of older workers have 0 retirement savings. Think about that. You're 50, 55 years of age, and you're thinking, all right, how am I going to retire? But because my wages have gone down, I have 0 in the bank for retirement. And at the same time, all over America, you got millions of seniors and people with disabilities trying to survive on $12,000 or $13,000 a year Social security. From Vermont to California, older workers are scared to death, and they are saying, how am I going to retire with dignity? And I want all of you can get your calculators out, not now, when you leave here. Do some arithmetic. And try to put yourself in the place of a senior citizen in my state of Vermont where it gets cold in the winter. Trying to survive on $13,000 a year. And you tell me how you are going to pay for the food that you need, heat your home, and buy the medicine that you need. And you know what? You can't do it. Today in America, nearly 47 million people are living in poverty, and over 20% of our children, including 36% of African American kids, are living in poverty, the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any nation on earth. And what I want you to think about is, why is it in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, where we're seeing a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth? Today in America, 29 million Americans have no health insurance, and even more are underinsured with outrageously high co-payments and deductibles. In other words, people do have insurance, but I talk to people every day. They got a $5,000 deductible, $8,000 deductible. They can't go to the doctor when they need. And then on top of that, for a wide variety of reasons, our people pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. And doctors tell me all of the time we prescribe something, a medicine for our patients, they can't afford to fill that medicine, that prescription. 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford to fill the prescriptions their doctors write. What insanity is that? Today in America, youth unemployment and underemployment is over 35%. For African American kids, it is over 50%. Meanwhile, we have more people in jail than any other country. China, communist authoritarian country, 4 times our size, we have more people in jail than China, and countless lives are being destroyed as we spend $80 billion a year locking up our fellow Americans. The bottom line is that today in America, we not only have massive wealth and income inequality, but a power structure built around that inequality, which protects those who have the money. Today, a handful of super wealthy campaign contributors have enormous influence over the political process, while their lobbyists determine much of what goes on in Congress. And any member of the United States House or Senate who is prepared to tell you the truth will tell you exactly that. Now, in 1944, in his State of the Union speech, President Roosevelt outlined what he called a second Bill of Rights. You're all familiar with our Bill of Rights. And what Roosevelt outlined was what he called a second Bill of Rights. This is, in my view, one of the more important speeches ever made by a president. But unfortunately, it has not gotten the attention that it deserves. So I'm going to give it some attention today. In his remarkable speech, this is what Roosevelt stated, and I quote, "We have come to a clear realization of the fact that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men," and we would add women, are not free men and women, end of quote. In other words, real freedom must include economic security. That was Roosevelt's vision 70 years ago. It is my vision today. It is a vision that we have not yet achieved, and it is time that we did.
That's Bernie Sanders. Of course, those of you who watch this program regularly, and I know there are a number of you because you send emails and make telephone calls about that. Those of you who watch Peacemaker Radio regularly, you know that speech system by Bernie Sanders, and he was clear in his address, long-awaited address at Georgetown University on Saturday evening last about the democratic socialism that he is advocating. What I am interested in now is finding a program, WBUR, and there's a reason for this. Let me just take a moment and see if I can find this program and speak while I'm doing this. The idea is that Bernie Sanders is shaking up the political establishment because he's speaking about things like democratic socialism. But the idea is even clearer. Bernie Sanders is also shaking up the political landscape for the reason that he's radical. Radical means, I believe, going to the root of the problem. Radical means going to the core of a problem. It's from the Greek or the Latin. So what I would like to compare with Bernie Sanders is a program that took place today on a local, a nationally syndicated but locally originated program from Boston University called On Point. Many of you who watch the program know this. But the reason why On Point was interesting today with the subject matter, should we go all in on ISIS? Should we go all in on ISIS? Was because it's my belief that Sanders is speaking truth to politics, finally getting the radical approach, meaning how the government works, speaking to the middle class, speaking to the working class, speaking clearly dollars and cents, and why our government is been taken over and how it's been taken over by ruling elites, by billionaires, and how it's been changed so that it works only in the interests of billionaires. So that the public is beginning to understand, the general public is beginning to understand what is necessary, what sacrifice may be necessary to rededicate the United States government. Everyone is dissatisfied with the U.S. government. I mean, the ratings for Congress are 15%, 20%. Approval ratings. So no one is interested in what Washington has to say, but they're not interested in it for the wrong reasons. They believe that no one in Washington wants to work. Well, it's true of the Republicans because of their tactic to block any bill making Obama appear as being completely incapable, so that they can then get someone in office like that Ben Carson, who actually believes that the pyramids were built to store grain in, or the screaming Donald Trump, whose solution to the immigration problem is to build a wall all along the border with Mexico and force everyone who is illegal, 8 million undocumented workers then back into Mexico and then build the wall. These types of concepts are irrational, to say the least. So this question of Sanders speaking truth to politics has now, in my opinion, then invaded the radio. And now the radio commentators, I believe, have the same general idea. And I would like to discuss, like to present this idea on this program presented today, because I feel it's so interesting. And my hope would be that you will let me provide this insight from this program. It's Tom Ashbrook's program from On Point Today.
From WBUR Boston and NPR, I'm Tom Ashbrook, and this is On Point. In the aftermath of the Paris attacks, there's a new clamor to take down ISIS in Syria and Iraq, to go into those countries and take out the caliphate directly. We're already bombing away, but we haven't sent in significant combat troops to fight. President Obama insists that America shouldn't. He's taking a lot of heat on that right now. This hour, On Point, a passionate case for and a fierce argument against the United States going big in the fight against ISIS. You can join us on air or online, where this conversation is always on. What's it going to take? What's the right way to go? Join us anytime at onpointradio.org or on Twitter and Facebook at On Point Radio. Joining me now from New York, Roger Cohen, columnist for the New York Times, where he writes about international affairs and diplomacy. He's said it's time for Western rage and NATO intervention, troops on the ground against ISIS. You can link to his column Body Bags in Paris at our website, onpointradio.org. Roger Cohen, welcome back to On Point. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tom.
And with me in the studio is Barry Posen, professor of political science at MIT. He's director of the Securities Studies program there, author of Restraint, a New Foundation for U.S. Grand Strategy. He argues restraint and containment are still the way to go. You can link to his recent essay in The Atlantic, Contain ISIS, at our website, onpointradio.org. Barry Posen, welcome back to you as well. Thank you for coming in.
Hello, Tom, and hello, Roger.
Roger Cohen, first to you. Your lament from Paris, which you know well, has been sharp and strong. You wrote, the West, post-Iraq, has lost its capacity for rage. Even at this, that is dangerous. And you write, to defeat ISIS in Syria and Iraq will require NATO forces on the ground. Could you describe what you think is the right move now, Roger?
Well, Tom, I think something fundamental has changed in the last month or so. ISIS was cast by the president and by a lot of other people as essentially a local threat, and an odious entity, but something that could be contained. Well, it turns out that by allowing ISIS to control territory, a lot of territory across Syria and Iraq, in effect, it has been able to turn its attention further afield. And what we've seen in the last month or so is that it is not a local threat. It is a global threat. It wants to bring its medievalist reading of the Quran and all the brutality that goes with that to the whole of Western civilization. And we've seen 129 people slaughtered in Paris.
more than 220 brought down in a Russian plane that was bombed by ISIS. And I think, therefore, the question arises, as it did post 9/11, can you allow an organization that is prepared to do this to hold territory which enables it to enrich itself, to plan, to organize, to draw recruits, to portray itself as a caliphate in reality where it can enslave women and children, practice every form of brutality, some of which we've seen, the beheading of Jim Foley and others. Can we allow the Islamic State, after all this, to continue to do what it has done? And my answer to that is no. And therefore, I argue that a plan has to be put in place to retake this territory.
And that to be done, you write, by NATO forces on the ground. In the lead?
Well, it involves how exactly. I am not going to set out the precise modalities of that. I don't feel that I can do that. But certainly it involves American leadership. It would involve, of course, local forces. Kurdish forces have proved effective against ISIS. These guys are effective terrorists. There's very little to show that they are effective soldiers. It would involve, of course, although it's been very reluctant to fight, the Iraqi army. It would involve Turkey, a NATO ally that has played very much a double game up to now in that President Erdogan in Turkey clearly prefers to use ISIS against the Kurds rather than fight ISIS all out. And he has allowed a very porous border to continue to exist that has allowed ISIS to grow and recruit and generally strengthen itself. So it involves local forces, but it involves American leadership, and it involves a readiness to put special forces and others on the ground. I don't believe that ISIS, you said go in big. And
that is out there now. That is certainly...
Yeah, go in big. Well, how big? Many assessments that I've seen talk of a force of perhaps 15,000, 20,000. And, the danger with history is that, of course, we allow the most recent history to dominate our thinking. We forget that after 9/11, the initial moves against al-Qaeda's haven in Afghanistan were effective. And that territory was retaken, and it was only when the huge disastrous distraction of Iraq emerged that the progress that was made there was lost. So I think we need to recall that, interventionism, as Iraq showed, can be disastrous. I don't think anyone can argue that Syria illustrates that non-interventionism works.
Roger Cohen, please stand by. It's great to have you here. Barry Posen, there's the argument. Roger Cohen writes that hesitation has been Obama's modus operandi on Syria, and says, well, you hear it, the territories must be retaken, actively retaken, not containment, but retaking. What do you say, Barry?
Well, I think caution has been the president's watchword, and I think it's been an intelligent strategy for him. It's certainly understandable to react with passion, emotion, rage at the terrible things that happened in Paris and the aftermath. But I think we should understand that our adversaries are trying to trigger intense emotions, and they hope that under the influence of intense emotions, we will make big mistakes. Now, I think we should stand back and look at how the president's strategy has been working, ask where it has had success, ask where it has not had success, and consider how to repair it. Now, when ISIS emerged on the scene in its sort of full force of tactical success in the region, it had local momentum. It struck fear into the heart of its adversaries. People were afraid that defenses would crumble on every border, that an ever-growing caliphate was a was an imminent problem. And with the investment of a few advisors, a few airstrikes, a few $1 million worth of munitions, the president and others in the region have managed to put a pretty strong palisade around the areas that ISIS controls. And in fact, ISIS overreached mainly into areas that are not populated by Sunni Arabs, such as in Kurdistan and in some parts of central and southern Iraq where there are Shia majorities or strong Shia minorities. And in those areas, locals have had the solidarity and the commitment to push back with our help to liberate their brethren, right? Well, this is a pretty impressive achievement for a very low cost. So now we find that ISIS, I wouldn't say much to our surprise, but certainly against what we hoped would remain the case when this policy began, we find that they're reaching out to become global terrorists in the same way that al-Qaeda did. Now, there are several explanations for this. One of the explanations, and it's not just mine, if you're following the press, you'll see it coming from people who study ISIS more closely than I do, that this is in part a response to the success of the strategy that we've had. ISIS needs a steady diet of telegenic victories to bring it support. And we've deprived it of a steady diet of telegenic victories. In fact, we started to administer some defeats. So they have reached out to soft targets to try and renew the image of momentum that they rely on for recruitment, right? And we missed that trick. I think it's wrong to call it an intelligence failure, because what we usually see after these is there's plenty of data, but it certainly was an intelligence interpretation failure, right? And we have to look at some of the things we need to do to make it hard for ISIS to operate abroad.
Can we leave them with their territory? Roger Cohen says, no, you have to retake it. You have to essentially shut down the caliphate. I mean, look, Brussels is on lockdown today. Paris is paralyzed.
Sure, but just because one can imagine a solution doesn't make the solution implementable or wise, right? So it would be nice if we could press a button and make ISIS go away, disappear it from history, right? Now, we tried disappearing al-Qaeda from history. We tried disappearing radical jihadism from history. We've used a policy of going out and meeting the adversary on their home turf in 2 countries. And in neither country has it been conspicuously successful. It wasn't successful in Afghanistan, and in Iraq there was no ISIS, there was no al-Qaeda, and we created the space for it. So we're talking about an area, right, in Iraq and Syria that has perhaps 6 or 8 million people in it. There's at least, people seem to believe a minimum of 20,000 ISIS fighters, right? To go there and extirpate this group is a much bigger job than the advocates of more action would like you to believe. And by the way, given our experience, it's likely that there will be unintended consequences that will themselves come back to bite us.
Moral or otherwise, to what they are prepared to do against us. They're in an all-out battle against us, and President Obama says, we'll get it done, no date, don't elevate them, and Barry argues that slowly we're getting the better of them. But they're using this time to do things, and we've seen just what those things are in Paris and elsewhere. And there's another aspect to this that we haven't talked about, and that is the moral aspect and the nature of evil. The United States hesitated for a very long time before getting involved in World War II, but it did in the end because it recognized the Third Reich for what it was, an incarnation of evil. I am not comparing the Islamic State to the Nazis, but I do believe that we are confronted by a force, ISIS, that represents something absolutely nefarious and unacceptable that denies everything that we in the West believe in, and also everything that the vast majority of Muslims around the world believe in. And so while I understand that the experiences of Afghanistan and Iraq have inclined us in the West and the United States in particular toward restraint, and I think some of the restraint President Obama has showed in other areas has been positive. I think that we are confronted today by a moral question which requires a strong military response from the United States of America, still the leader of the free world, to take out the territory from which the Islamic State is able to plan acts of pure evil against us.
What do you think that's going to take, Roger? I mean, you wrote that it was time for NATO forces on the ground. You demurred a little bit when I raised that just now. Are you backing away from that?
No, I'm not backing away. It does involve NATO forces, but I'm not trying to divorce that from the responsibility of other actors in the region. I feel very strongly about the role Turkey has played, and President Erdogan in particular. He used ISIS against the Kurds. There were two attacks against the Kurds, one in July and one in October, both perpetrated by the same family belonging to ISIS. The Turkish security services knew very well about this, but President Erdogan preferred to play ISIS against the Kurds and create an atmosphere of unrest that played favorably for him in that election. I also feel in the election which he won, I also feel very strongly about the role of Saudi Arabia, our ally, which, like Turkey, has played a double game and whose Wahhabi philosophy of fundamentalist Islamic teaching has played a big role in the growth of organizations like ISIS around the world. The Kurds obviously can play a very important role, and one would certainly hope that the Iraqi army can too, but it does require American forces on the ground, and it requires... The mood in Britain has changed very considerably. I was reading polls that show a majority of people in Britain now favor the use of ground troops. So I think there is a mood swing. Clearly the French have very, very strong feelings about this. I do not believe the United States should go in alone, and I don't believe that the size of the force required to crush ISIS is huge. So, no, I'm not backing away from my argument. I think we need to go in there and take Raqqa, take it down, kick ISIS out of there.
Barry Posen, Roger writes, the West has lost its spine, a spine called America. Now, you know, whatever you think about the strategy broadly, very broadly, that he's brushing here, you know, Roger's somebody who has a sense of, what, the region, of the way people are thinking. He says these barbaric terrorists cannot be allowed any longer to control territory in which they're able to organize, finance, direct, and plan their savagery. This has a lot of appeal to a lot of people right now that are worried.
Right, but...
So, thank you for listening to this WBUR program from today. We have chosen to broadcast a part of that to compare what radio is now doing and compare that with Bernie Sanders. We feel that Bernie Sanders addressing the issues head on, speaking directly to the public, directly to the need to act radically to solve the problems of a government of the ruling elites, by the ruling elites, and for the ruling elites, should not continue, should not be allowed to continue, and that the American voters, the American public, needs to take back their government and to say that the government belongs to all of us and not just the ruling elites. Sanders says that this is the case because of Citizens United, because the Supreme Court has legalized the opportunity for billionaires to make huge political contributions to super PACs to enable the control of the governmental process, the election process. And that with this in place, the future of democracy, the future of America, the future of an America in which the citizens all have part of the federal government, of how the government works, is in danger. So now, his speaking directly to the issues, Sanders speaking directly to the issues, seems to be motivating now a more direct discussion of Iraq. Sanders does not spend much time on Iraq. He spends time on the domestic problem. Actually, his contrahendant, the other Democratic candidate running, the wife of the last future president, President Clinton. Now, Hillary Clinton is trying to extend the dynasty of her husband, who have become millionaires since being in the presidency. They earn a lot of money. They earn lots of money. And Hillary Clinton represents Wall Street, represents the interests of Wall Street and the banks. So it's not to be expected that Hillary Clinton, who was a Secretary of State for the last 4 years, before John Kerry, under President Obama, knows very well the problems of Iraq and Afghanistan. She is a major responsible. She didn't create the problem, but she couldn't solve the problem either. So Hillary Clinton says things about ISIS and about Iraq and about Afghanistan, but she didn't solve the problem. She didn't get a solution to the problem. But now she wants to be President of the United States when she didn't solve it as Secretary of State. How is that? How do you move up in the ladder of employment when you don't solve a problem at all, but then become general manager of the company that you were working for, or CEO? She wants to be CEO when she was a lousy, quite truthfully, a completely ineffective salesperson or problem solver as Secretary of State. She did a horrifically bad job, truly. She didn't solve any of the problems and created some that if she were to get the Democratic nomination and run against a Republican, you can be certain that the problem that she created with Benghazi and with the possible violation of federal law in reference to what she said on her emails and what she disclosed. But that's not the issue today. The issue today here in reference to the WBUR program is the question about trying to solve a problem by applying the same techniques that have failed time and time again in the past is a sign of insanity. Trying to get a different result by using the same methods is it's a test that one gives to find out if someone is mentally ill. That's the same process that the United States is saying again to solve the problems with ISIS by going in and invading that country again and then killing everyone and then trying to convert the government back to taking over their interests on their own. It took generations in the United States, generations of homesteading, of local working through problems locally, of establishing ways to solve problems locally in the United States. From 1620 until 1789, that's 160 years that the American colonists had to work through something called democracy. We cannot expect in 5 years the Middle Eastern countries to know how to run a democratic structure. It took us 160 years. So creating a democracy in the Middle East is not going to work in 20 years. It's not going to work in 25 years. It took us 5 times that long, 6 times that long, 6 times 25 years, just to learn how to do it. We can't make this expectation. But back to the program now, because I think the rest of the things that are said are of interest.
The point is not that ISIS isn't a threat to the region or isn't a threat to the safety of people living in Western countries. The question is, how big a threat is it, and what is the most, I'll use the language of cost effectiveness here, but it doesn't capture it. What is the smartest strategy for dealing with this group? Now, Roger himself just talked about his unhappiness with Turkey and his unhappiness with Saudi Arabia, right? I'm very reluctant to try and use American troops directly on the ground in the Middle East again to solve a problem that is energized by countries that call themselves our allies and who benefit from our protection.
But can we just let this burn?
No, well, just a second here, right? Mm-hmm. We're not just letting it burn. Every day, American airplanes fly over the areas controlled by ISIS. American intelligence assets are all over the area. ISIS leaders can't sleep in the same place twice, I'm pretty sure. They have to be extremely careful in whatever they do. They have to move about their real estate with incredible prudence and care to avoid being killed by airplanes. There's a lot of things being done to abrade ISIS's strength where it is. That's point one. Point two, and I'll say it again, mm-hmm. We, but especially our allies in Europe, right, have still not done enough to put barriers between the real estate controlled by ISIS and our own countries, right? Turkey is part of that barrier, right? If Turkey isn't going
to... Could be, isn't.
It has to be. If there's no solution in Turkey, there's no solution, right? But second, as we've seen from ample newspaper coverage in the last few days, right, European intelligence services have been, and police services have been at 6s and 7s, right? They don't cooperate. They don't share information. They've been under-resourced. It's not that they didn't know about these people. It's that there were all kinds of seams and gaps and barriers that they should have plugged long ago.
But is it really
right?
geographic? I mean, the argument is made that just by standing there, ISIS becomes a beacon, becomes a rallying cry. Any number of the people involved in these things didn't even come from the region. They're French-born, Brussels.
But the point is, if ISIS can be weakened, contained, abraded, if its agents can be intercepted and incarcerated, right? If its leaders are under death sentences, right? If we can deprive ISIS of the illusion of success, the illusion of vitality, right? Then this beacon role that Roger says it serves, and I'll take him at his word, this beacon is going to become a lot duller, right? And over time, right, either the organization will atrophy or it will become vulnerable to local predation. Roger talks about Kurds and Shia, maybe Syrian Arabs. These people are not going to fight on the offense until ISIL looks weak, and our job is to weaken it, right? Then this is a long-term strategy. But it has some benefits, right? And that is that the local politics and the local solutions will be owned by local people. And if they are, they have a better likelihood, I think, of being sustained than if the West comes in and essentially drives ISIS out of the cities, but then tries itself to reorganize the politics of the region to inoculate it against ISIS. At this, we have conspicuously failed, and to try it again strikes me as being. I don't want to use pejorative language here, but certainly I would say futile.
So this is the point at which one of the debating individuals has actually recognized something, the question of insanity. Trying to solve a problem by using the same methods that were futile in the past is a definition of insanity, irrationality at least. But this is exactly what one of the two parties is advocating, to go back in with strength, to kill everyone, to drive any political leadership out of the cities into the countryside, and then repopulate the cities, and then try to convince them what democratic process is about, so that they can build a police force and defend themselves. Excuse me. Meanwhile, the political realities of the cost of unending warfare. That's what we have here. We have unending warfare. The United States has been at war, and you don't have to believe me on this. You can listen to historical experts, critical historical experts. You can listen to Chomsky about the role of the United States Secret Service, FBI, CIA over the last 70 years. And you will learn that the United States has unendingly been at war with one nation or another, invading them, subverting their leadership, killing off their critical voices in one country, in Latin America, in South America, in Asia, in the Pacific Rim, in Africa, in the Middle East, over 70 years. This is the system the United States uses, and it is hypocritical beyond any belief, hypocritical to say that we need to continue this policy because we work in the interests of democracy. We work in the interests of the people. The United States military-industrial complex does not work in anyone's interests but the interests of the ruling elites, from whom they take their orders through the president and the Congress. That's what the system is. That's what Bernie Sanders is talking about. That's the reality, and the Young Turks and critical voices anywhere, in addition to the critical voices at Georgetown University, where Bernie Sanders spoke on Saturday, will, given the opportunity, make this clear. Let's continue the program again, and thank you for listening to Peace Worker Radio.
Roger?
Well, I'm tempted to ask Barry if there would be a tipping point for him. If what had happened in Paris had happened in New York, would he feel the same? If there was some other large-scale massacre in Hamburg or Milan, would he feel the same? Is there a tipping point at which this gradualism becomes unacceptable?
I can't predict my own emotions. I mean, if we want to have a conversation about emotions, I guess we can. But we've been at this for what, 14 years now, and I can admit that after 9/11, my reactions were quite emotional, and I'm not sure all the actions of our country that flowed from that emotional state were all wise and conducive to solutions.
Absolutely not.
So my role here, perhaps self-appointed, is to try and keep a cool head. I mean, we have plenty of people out there, including you, and I respect your reasons for making the argument, who will say, look, we can't wait, we have to go. But I smell that this is the reaction that the other side wants.
Why would they want this?
Because they can't. It's
to lose Raqqa, to lose the caliphate, to be rolled up, rolled over. If that's indeed what would ensue.
But flip it on its head.
How does that make them a stronger beacon if they're defeated?
Because I don't believe they think they're going to be defeated in the sense that we think they're going to be defeated. Right, and B, I think
the Taliban's still there in Afghanistan, waiting now to come back if they give them the chance.
The Al-Qaeda banner flies across Syria today. I mean, I don't know why you think Al-Qaeda has been extirpated. It hasn't. We had a bunch of killings in Mali the other day that were credited to the Al-Qaeda side of the ledger. Right? So I think that they have a notion of theater. So just imagine this, right? You're an ISIS fighter. Right? American airplanes come over your real estate, your self-described caliphate every day. And every day they kill some of your friends. And there's not a single thing you can do about it. Nothing. You don't have a weapon. All you can do is dig into the dirt and hope they don't see you.
Oh, and wait down a Russian plane. They've gone to Beirut. They've gone to Paris.
And wait for an opportunity.
Or kill people in Paris. Or kill people in Paris.
They want to kill people in Paris, and we haven't done enough.
That's what they do.
Stephen Walt, if I may, Stephen Walt writes in Foreign Policy just in the last few days. He says, regrettably, events such as the Paris attacks will remain a recurring feature of 21st century life. But to repeat, they are not an existential threat. Are you saying, Barry Posen, that this is part of the cost of a long-term containment policy that we have to just live with, attacks like we've seen in Paris?
This is a crucial point. Tom Ashbrook has placed with this question a crucial statement. Do we have to put up with this? Is this part of the continuing life? Look, let me explain it as someone explained it to me recently. So, let's say the United States is invaded and they occupy the West Coast. So others, Americans who have not been killed or captured or suppressed, decide to fight against the occupying force in California. So they put up an army together and go to California to battle against the occupation of California and the takeover of the United States. So these individuals are killed, and then others are sent and killed. Would you imagine that over a period of time, that when brothers, sisters, uncles, fathers, friends, boyfriends, husbands were killed, that you then growing up in Michigan would develop an unending hatred against whoever was occupying, or say a hatred in any case, of who was occupying California and killing your relatives, your mothers and your fathers, your uncles, your boyfriends, your brothers, your cousins. Of course, that's basically the motivation for the enmity against Germany, because they committed so many killings. It's the enmity that people in Iraq, in Afghanistan have against who else? Who else would they have this enmity against besides the nations that have created the killings that have gone on for 14 years, and that was started not out of a reason to invade, but out of false pretenses. The Iraq War was started by Bush under false pretenses. That's clear. We forget that, at least Many of us forget that. The Republicans want us to forget it completely, that it was a Republican president who invaded Iraq and created all this mess. So the question is, how are we going to end this unending warfare? And how little effort does it take for individuals, terrorists, to create bloodbaths and destabilize an entire government simply by that? The Red Army faction in Germany, had 5 main members and almost brought down the entire West German government within 2 years. It's not difficult. It is a destabilization factor. And that's the question that was brought up here, but not mentioned. We are in danger of a destabilization of the entire Western way of life simply because we do not have in proportion, and we are not attending to our problems. Our problems, as Bernie Sanders clearly says, and as Hillary Clinton will not even mention, our problems are domestic in nature and not foreign in nature. We have domestic problems that we need to solve through solutions of the restructuring of government, taking the government back for the people. Sanders says we need to take the government in Washington back because the government belongs to all Americans and not just the 1%. Let's get back to our discussion. Thank you for listening to Peace Worker Radio.
Well, I'm not going to say it's the cost of a long-term containment policy. What I guess I would make a larger observation that we built a world, and that world is characterized by travel and communications and open borders and the internet and the spread of education and the free flow of technical knowledge that allows people to learn how to build IEDs and to use secure
Maybe ISIS
secure
can't fit in that world.
But they seem to fit in it well enough to do damage. And the only point that I would make is that there is some element of risk that we have built into the world that we built. And it's part of the price of the world that we built. Now, ISIS per se, right, I believe we should do a whole series of things that I've talked about to try and make their lives difficult, to make their future bleak.
Maybe
to make
the price is that we have to police
the
whole thing. Maybe the price is not tolerance of terrorism, but policing the
You are
globalized.
Policing the whole thing.
Well, not very effectively.
Not very effectively. I guess if you look
Blood in the street.
I guess if you look at the potential for damage that's inherent in Western societies, and you look at the openness that we've created, it's a kind of a wonder that things aren't a lot worse.
So that was their point, and this is the point that we would like to make here at this juncture of our program. After the occupation of California by an invading army and brothers and sisters killed and husbands, cousins, uncles, fathers. How much willingness would there be to sacrifice whatever was necessary to sacrifice, to become a hero? We have a long heroic tradition in the comic books in the United States. To become a hero, to end that type of occupation, the occupation of the homeland. How much effort would it take to motivate young people to risk whatever it takes to free California from the occupying army? I don't think it would cost a lot of motivation. That's the problem that is being spoken to now. We've built a society which is open. The United States is without borders. The continental United States wants free rights of travel. The horror that the Republican Party is bringing forward now is don't let Syrians in. We created the problem. The Republican Party created the Syrian problem, the Syrian refugee problem, through the Republican President George Bush, who invaded Iraq on pretenses. They created the ISIS problem. And now they're trying to say, let's change the American system so that we don't have to have Syrian refugees, women and children to 95%. We don't have to let women and children who are fleeing, who have lost husbands, fathers, brothers, uncles, they are destitute, fleeing from a war zone in which the United States is using drones and bombs and all kinds of horrific methods to dislodge ISIS. It's a system that is demoralizing the United States. It's demoralizing our way of thinking. It's demoralizing our history. We are an open people. We are a generous society. We have bad government. We have entrenched interests. And as Roosevelt in the 1930s proposed a solution for this, which was called socialism, so Bernie Sanders proposes a solution which is also called socialism. It's a very similar situation. The difference is we went into a war after the Roosevelt administration with the Nazis. We're trying to get out of a war in the Middle East. And hopefully, through the election of Bernie Sanders, that will be possible, that we can rekindle and reinvigorate our society through concentrating on domestic issues which need to be solved, and the nuclear arsenal and global climate change, two of the most important issues that need to be addressed. Thank you so much.
That's required.
That's what it is, and is that all right?
Well, I guess ISIS would have to prove to me with a wave of very successful attacks that they constituted a not exactly a mortal threat, because it's very hard to destroy a Western country from afar, but a threat that we simply could not get our arms around through the vast amounts of money and resources that we throw at intelligence and security, and that has not been proven yet, right? And people say, well, why should we wait?
Yeah, research